She ordered the simple man to move. 15 minutes later, the pilot stopped the entire flight and saluted him. He looked like nobody. A man with tired eyes, a dusty backpack, and silence that followed him like a shadow. But in 15 minutes, the entire flight would rise to its feet for him. The flight to New Orleans, USA was nearly full, buzzing with the usual shuffle of business travelers, vacationers, and high-end conference attendees. He stepped onto the plane quietly, almost cautiously, as if he had learned long ago that the world noticed people like him only when it wanted to push them aside. Before we move further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for heartwarming stories like this. Likewise, tell us where you are watching from in the comment below. His clothes were plain. Nothing offensive, nothing fashionable. Just enough to pass unnoticed. He clutched his backpack like it held something irreplaceable. Perhaps because it did. As he moved down the aisle, eyes flicked over him and quickly away. He glanced at his ticket, then up at the row numbers. Row 1. Seat A. First class. He stopped beside the window seat and offered a polite nod to the woman in the aisle seat. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I believe this is mine." She didn't smile. Didn't even blink kindly. Instead, she looked him over like he'd tracked mud onto marble floors. "You're in the wrong section," she said, loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "This is first class." He looked again at the boarding pass in his hand. "Row 1, Seat A," he repeated, uncertain but calm. The woman raised an eyebrow, then turned sharply to the nearest flight attendant. "I don't know how he got up here, but he clearly doesn't belong." The attendant arrived, awkward and tense. She took the man's ticket, double-checked it, and frowned. "Sir, I'm very sorry. There's been a last-minute seat reassignment. You've been moved to row 35. A wave of discomfort passed through the cabin. Row 35. The last row. Next to the engine. By the lavatory. The man didn't argue. He didn't look angry. "Of course," he said quietly, nodding with almost too much understanding. "Mistakes happen." He turned, lifting his backpack as murmurs spread. A businessman shook his head, whispering something under his breath. A teenage girl snapped a photo with her phone. The woman leaned back in her seat, victorious. Every step toward the back felt like confirmation. He didn't belong. He passed 34 rows of judgment, then reached the final one, tucked into the very rear of the plane, where legroom shrunk and the engine roared. He sat down, placed his bag beneath the seat, and looked out the window with the same quiet that had followed him since the terminal. He said nothing, but in his stillness, there was a dignity too subtle for most to recognize. No one knew that just weeks earlier, during a storm in New Orleans, this same man had climbed into a burning commuter bus on I-10 and carried out 13 strangers. The explosion came moments after he pulled the last child to safety. He never gave his name to the press. He just disappeared. And now, on this very flight, bound for the same city, he had been misjudged again. But the cockpit held a file just delivered moments ago. A confidential update. A pilot who glanced at the name, paused, and looked up sharply. Back in the last row, the simple man stared through the window, calm as the clouds beyond it. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did she. And the skies over New Orleans were about to witness something unforgettable. He sat motionless in the back row, pressed against the window as the engines began their low, steady rumble. Around him, passengers adjusted neck pillows and flipped through safety cards. The hum of small talk filled the cabin, but he didn't hear any of it. His thoughts were elsewhere, far from the confines of seat 35. Outside the window, the runway blurred with light and heat. But in his mind, a very different world flickered to life. Smoke. Screams. Flames rising higher than trees. It had happened so fast. A bus overturned on the I-10 outside New Orleans. The smell of burning fuel. The sound of twisted metal splitting open. A mother screaming for her child. And then him. A man in plain clothes, sprinting toward the wreckage when everyone else ran the other way. He saw it again, the mangled bus door, the child pinned beneath a crumpled row of seats, his own hands blistered as he pulled metal apart with nothing but grit and desperation. His arm bled freely, soaking his sleeve, but he didn't stop not until the last passenger was out and the front half of the bus exploded behind him. Back in the present, his fingers curled slightly against his thigh. The skin was scarred there now, beneath the fabric. Faded, but permanent. A voice pierced through the recollection, sharp, confident, and far too familiar. "I can't stand people who pretend like they belong here," the woman in first class said with a chuckle. "Honestly, it's embarrassing. You can tell right away when someone hasn't flown premium before." Her words carried in the quiet lull before takeoff, cutting through air that hadn't asked for them. I mean, the way he just walked in and sat down. Like no one would notice. Come on, she laughed. It's always the same look. Wide-eyed. Lost. Like they've never seen a glass of Prosecco on a flight before. Her seatmate, a middle-aged man with a gold watch and forced smile, nodded along politely, clearly more interested in his tablet than her commentary. But that didn't stop her. I work hard, she went on. I earn my seat. Some people think being quiet makes them deserving. That's not humility. It's mediocrity in disguise. The man in row 35 heard none of this directly, yet he didn't need to. He knew the tone. He'd heard it before. In waiting rooms, in courtrooms, in places where people decided your worth before asking your name. He turned his gaze back to the window. The plane was inching forward now, taxiing slowly. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass. Older than he remembered, wearier, but solid. Anchored. The memories were fading again. The chaos. The fire. The face of the little girl who wouldn't let go of his hand even after the EMTs arrived. She had looked up at him and said something he'd never forget. You didn't leave me. He hadn't. And he never would. In the front of the plane, laughter continued. In the back, silence reigned. He closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to remember clearly. Moments like that didn't belong to headlines. They belonged to the ones who survived and the ones who stayed behind to make sure they did. Then the speaker chimed. A pause. The captain's voice began to rise overhead. But the man didn't open his eyes just yet. Something was coming. He didn't know what or when, but the quiet in his chest told him it was near. Just like the moment before the bus had gone silent. Just like now. The plane had reached its cruising altitude. The seatbelt signs blinked off with a soft chime, and the mood inside the cabin shifted into something quieter, more routine. Conversations resumed in low murmurs. The occasional clink of ice and plastic cups accompanied the sound of rolling carts and polite greetings from the flight attendants. Some passengers leaned into naps, others opened laptops. Life in the sky had settled into its rhythm. Near the back, he remained still. His gaze, steady as ever, lingered on the clouds drifting beside him. His thoughts were his own. He had spoken to no one, requested nothing. He simply existed there, unobtrusive. An anonymous figure suspended between cities, between identities, between chapters of a life most would never understand. Then it happened. The intercom cracked to life with a short burst of static. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice began, warm and clear. I hope you're enjoying your flight this afternoon. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special traveling with us today. Conversations paused. Brows lifted. Nap takers stirred. This man is a civilian who displayed extraordinary courage during a recent highway tragedy in New Orleans, the captain continued. Thanks to his selfless actions, multiple lives were saved. He asked for no recognition, gave no interviews, but today we'd like to honor him. A ripple spread through the cabin. Curious glances darted left and right. Who do you think it is? A woman whispered to her husband. Must be a war vet, someone said nearby. Maybe a fireman. First class stir with interest. Several heads turned toward the front, expecting a uniform, maybe a dignitary. The woman in red shifted in her seat and rolled her eyes. Oh, please, she muttered, shaking her head with a smug smile. Watch it be some washed-up local hero. Probably a retired officer or a small-town mayor looking for attention. Her seatmate looked unsure, but said nothing. People love turning ordinary drama into hero stories, she added, swirling the ice in her drink. I've seen it 100 times. Rescue a cat from a tree, and suddenly you're a national treasure. Her voice dripped with dismissal, but the air around her had changed. Flight attendants had paused their service. One of them, holding a tray of beverages, seemed momentarily lost in thought, her eyes scanning the rows with a question she hadn't yet formed. In economy, a young boy pressed his face to the seat in front of him. Daddy, is the hero sitting near us? He whispered. His father shushed him gently. We'll find out soon. The man in row 35 still hadn't moved. He had heard the announcement. He always heard more than people assumed. Yet his expression remained calm, unreadable. He stared ahead as if the words belonged to someone else entirely. Farther up, a teenage girl tapped her phone rapidly, posting the pilot's words online before the message had even finished. And in first class, the woman leaned forward slightly now, curiosity edging into her tone despite herself. They're probably going to bring him to the front, she said. Or at least make a speech or something. Her voice was no longer amused. It was searching. The captain's voice concluded with a pause heavy with meaning. Wherever you're sitting, sir, we thank you. On behalf of the airline and everyone whose lives you touched, you are truly appreciated. Another wave of whispers moved through the plane, but no one stood. No one clapped. Not yet. Because no one knew who he was. Not even her. Not yet. The screams had faded, but the silence that followed never left him. Thick black smoke curled into the morning sky over the broken shell of the passenger bus. Charred debris littered the roadside. The smell of gasoline hung in the air, mingling with scorched metal and fear. Emergency responders rushed between bodies, some motionless, some barely clinging to life. Sirens wailed in the distance, but the real noise was the chaos, the panicked cries of the injured, the sharp commands of medics, the sobs of those too late to help. In the middle of it all stood one man. His hands were raw, his sleeves torn and soaked with blood not his own. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths, but he didn't stop. He had dragged 13 people from that wreckage. 13, one by one, even after the front end burst into flames. Even after a firefighter screamed at him to back away. Then, before the media could arrive, before the applause and cameras, he vanished. No name, no interviews, no medals, just footprints in ash. Headlines try to catch up. Mystery man saves 13 in bus inferno. Hero vanishes before he can be thanked. The silent savior. But he didn't read them. He didn't want them. The world would forget eventually, and that suited him just fine. Back in the present, 30,000 feet above the city he had saved, the cabin hummed with quiet unease. The captain's announcement still lingered in the air like static. And the man, now seated near the back of the plane, hadn't moved. His fingers rested calmly on his knees, but there was something steadying in his posture, something rooted deeper than any uniform or title. He wasn't expecting anything. That was the secret to his peace. Expect nothing, serve without seeking. Then she came, the flight attendant. Younger, but not inexperienced. Her face carried the poise of someone used to emergencies. But this was different. Her steps slowed as she approached. Her brows were slightly knit, not with suspicion, but with something closer to reverence and confusion, like she was walking towards someone she should recognize but couldn't quite place. She held the earpiece closer to her mouth, murmuring quietly to the crew. Her eyes flicked down at the man, then back toward the front of the plane. And still, he didn't look up. Not yet. The woman hesitated. She didn't want to disturb him, and yet something in the captain's message, and something in the name she'd just been given, pulled her forward. She stepped a little closer. The man blinked slowly, sensing her presence. His gaze lifted. Calm, unreadable, steady. For a brief second, their eyes met. She opened her mouth, unsure of what to say. But before she could speak, her earpiece crackled again. Whatever came through made her straighten slightly. Her hand hovered near her chest. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. The man tilted his head slightly, still silent. Then the attendant gave the faintest nod, more to herself than to him, and stepped back. She turned and began walking swiftly down the aisle, whispering into her mic again, her pace more urgent now. She had a name. She had a face. And the pieces were finally beginning to connect. Passengers watched her curiously, sensing something they couldn't name. Whispers resumed. The atmosphere thickened. But in the back row, the man resumed his stillness. Whatever was coming, he had faced worse. And it was drawing closer by the second. The air inside the cabin shifted. Soft footsteps echoed down the aisle. Measured, deliberate. A strange quiet had fallen among the passengers. Conversations tapered off. Snack wrappers paused mid-rustle. Every pair of eyes turned, first with curiosity, then confusion, then something else entirely. The pilot didn't rush. He walked with the weight of purpose, his eyes scanning the rows with care. His uniform was crisp, his jaw set, but there was something deeper in his expression. A solemnity that didn't come from routine or protocol. This wasn't about airline procedure. He reached the final row. There, seated near the window, still and quiet as ever, was the man no one had noticed when he boarded. The man who had moved without complaint when displaced. The one whose silence had gone unacknowledged. Until now. The pilot stopped, feet firm, posture straight. "Sir," he said, voice steady but loud enough for all to hear, "on behalf of the airline and this nation, I salute you." A sharp intake of breath swept through the cabin. The pilot raised his hand with precision, fingers pressed against his brow in perfect form. A salute. Not casual, not performative. It carried the full weight of sincerity, as if the man before him ranked higher than medals, higher than fame. The man in the seat didn't move, not out of arrogance, but because he didn't expect this. Not now, not ever. Around them, passengers watched in stunned stillness. Some exchanged glances, searching for recognition. Others simply stared, breath held. Slowly, realization began to dawn. This was the man the captain had spoken of. The hero. The ghost who had vanished after saving lives on a highway engulfed in fire. First class, once smug and detached, was not immune to the shift. A soft murmur spread toward the front of the plane. Confused whispers turned to gasps. Then chairs creaked as one passenger after another turned around. The woman in red, polished, proud, and unmoved an hour ago, heard the wave of noise like a tide pushing against her certainty. She rose, adjusting her blazer as if shielding herself from something unknown. Her heels clicked once as she stepped into the aisle and glanced toward the back. And then, she saw him. Her expression faltered instantly. That face, the same one she had dismissed, belittled, brushed off as unworthy of the seat beside her, now receiving a salute from the captain of the aircraft. The color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes locked onto his figure. Still seated, still calm, but now bathed in the reverence she had claimed for herself. A slow collapse unfolded across her features. Pride melted into something more human. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Because what could she say? He hadn't even looked her way. He didn't need to. Respect, the kind earned in silence, had found him without a single request. And she stood there alone, wrapped in shame no red blazer could hide. In the back, the man gave a small nod to the pilot. Barely visible. A gesture of acknowledgement, not acceptance. He didn't bask in it. He didn't rise. Because real heroes don't need applause. And yet, all around him, hearts were beginning to rise. But before anyone could speak, another voice pierced the silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, it began. A single pair of hands came together in the middle rows. Slow, unsure, but deliberate. The sound echoed louder than expected. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the cabin erupted into applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind. This was thunderous, rising with awe, shaped by discovery and guilt, admiration and disbelief. Some passengers stood. Others craned their necks, trying to catch a better look at the man they'd ignored. The clapping grew. Not out of routine, but reverence. Still seated in the last row, he looked around with quiet astonishment. His eyes blinked slowly, like someone trying to make sense of noise that didn't belong to him. He shook his head, not in dismissal, but disbelief. His hand rose, open and modest, as though to say enough, please, but the gesture only fueled the applause. He had never wanted attention. Not then. Not now. His breath caught in his throat, and he lowered his head slightly, overwhelmed. A man who had walked through fire was now undone by gratitude. The pilot remained standing in front of him, expression resolute. Your humility doesn't erase your greatness, he said with quiet force. You've done something most wouldn't even attempt. The world ought to know. The cabin quieted, listening. Before the man could respond, the flight attendant from earlier returned. Her demeanor had changed. No longer rushed or uncertain. Now, she moved with the softness of someone approaching something sacred. She knelt slightly, holding out a folded paper. A reassignment. It's yours, she said. Row 1. No mistake this time. We'd be honored. The cabin seemed to pause, waiting for his answer. Even the hum of the engines faded into the background. He looked down at the paper, then back at her. His mouth curved into a gentle smile. Tired, kind, and resolute. I'm fine here, he said. A ripple of surprise moved through the plane. The attendant blinked, unsure she heard right. But, she began. Let others be comfortable, he added, gesturing faintly to the crowded rows ahead. I've had my seat. That's enough. The pilot looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Slowly, with respect that needed no further words. Passengers exchanged glances again, this time with something deeper than admiration. He had turned down what many would have grasped at without hesitation. Not out of pride, but out of principle. He wasn't making a statement. He was simply being who he'd always been. The flight attendant lingered, almost reluctant to leave, then tucked the reassignment slip into her pocket. If you change your mind, she said quietly. The flight attendant lingered, almost reluctant to leave, then tucked the reassignment slip into her pocket. If you change your mind, she said quietly. He nodded once more, a man of few words but unwavering presence. A little boy 2 rows ahead leaned into the aisle, whispering to his mother, "Is he a superhero?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were glassy. And somewhere near the front, a woman in red sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the man she had tried to erase. She gripped the armrest, suddenly small in a world she once thought she ruled. But this moment no longer belonged to her. It belonged to him. The man in the back seat, who had already changed lives without ever asking for a thing. The clapping had stopped, but something else was building. A shift. A quiet that spoke more than noise ever could. And just as the plane settled again, another surprise waited in the wings. The clouds thinned as the aircraft began its descent. Below, the faint outline of the city emerged. Roads like veins, buildings like clustered memories. A soft chime signaled that landing was near, and seatbacks clicked into place one after another. But something in the air had already shifted. It wasn't the turbulence that made people still. It was the weight of what they now knew. No one looked at him the way they had before. Not with suspicion, not with indifference. Instead, there was a quiet, collective reverence. Subtle but sincere. A nod here. A softened glance there. No words spoken, but something shared. In first class, the woman who had once dismissed him said nothing. Her posture was straighter now, but the power in her expression had vanished. She watched him from across the aisle, no longer with superiority, but with the realization of how quickly illusions can crumble. Her lips moved once, as if to say something. An apology, maybe. But the words dissolved before they reached the air. She looked down. And in that moment, she understood something she never learned in boardrooms or airports. Respect is not owed to titles, but earned by courage. The plane touched down gently, wheels skimming the runway before settling with a faint shudder. Applause did not erupt this time. No forced celebration. Just silence. Full and meaningful. As if the cabin itself had taken a breath. As they taxied toward the gate, a few passengers reached for their phones, checking updates, confirming arrivals. But the real news was waiting beyond the glass. A crowd had gathered. Journalists, cameramen, reporters holding microphones with anticipation. They huddled near the terminal exit, eyes fixed on the jetway, alerted not by fame, but by truth. The airline hadn't planned a spectacle. But someone, quietly, discreetly, had made sure the story wouldn't go untold. Inside the aircraft, the simple man stood when it was his turn, lifting his weathered backpack with practiced ease. There was no rush in his movement, no hesitation. He walked down the aisle the same way he'd come in. Quietly, humbly. But everything around him had changed. Some passengers whispered soft goodbyes. Others simply watched. And though none reached out, many wished they had. He stepped through the door and onto the jet bridge. The light at the end glared slightly. The crowd stiffened. Microphones rose. A dozen voices prepared to shout the same question. What made you do it? Why didn't you come forward sooner? What do you have to say to the people you saved? He didn't stop. But just before he reached the end, he turned slightly. His eyes met no camera in particular. No script. No spotlight. Only a pause. A single sentence. Heroes aren't special people, he said softly. We just act when others hesitate. And with that, he disappeared into the crowd. Not escorted, not surrounded. Just gone. Inside the terminal, the noise resumed. Luggage wheels spun. Announcements rang out. And yet, for those who had seen him, something had changed forever. Back on the screen, in bold white against black, the words appeared slowly, fading in with quiet strength. Never judge a man by his clothes, his heart might carry nations. Don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this video. Thank you.